evening, everyone. Make sure this is all right. Can you hear me? Great, thank you. My name is Cher Snyder, and I'm an Assistant Deputy Executive Officer at AQMD, and I work in the Engineering and Compliance Group. So if any of you had the opportunity to talk with any of our inspectors, that's the compliance portion of our organization. With me here this evening as well as Dr. Jason Lowe, who is our Atmospheric Measurements Manager. And what I'd like to do is to just start off in a couple of moments walking through some of the key events that I'm sure you will all recognize and that will be familiar to you. And then I'm going to turn things over to Jason so that he'll be able to talk with you more specifically about the kinds of atmospheric measurements that we at SCAQMD have been making in the local community and give you an understanding of that. But I do want to acknowledge also, I'm sure many of you know that Supervisor Antonovich is a member of our governing board as well, and so it's a privilege to be here with him this evening as well. Many of these key events you will recognize. October 23rd, I think we all know, was the date when the natural gas leak from well SS25 was discovered. And the following day, we received our very first air quality complaint from this region, advising us that there was a problem, an odor problem. Since that date, we have received now over 2,300 complaints, air quality complaints. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. On October 26th, we actually began ongoing air sampling and monitoring activities here in the local community. And on November 5th, we issued a notice to comply to SoCalGas to abate the release of mercaptan odors from the gas that was impacting the local community. A little bit later that month, we actually issued a notice of violation to SoCalGas for creating a public nuisance. This is in violation of our District Rule 402, as well as a violation of the State Health and Safety Code, Section 41700. On December 10th, we petitioned our hearing board for an order for abatement that would require the company to abate the natural gas leak, monitor the leaking gas, and also reduce the nuisance impacts on the local community. And I'm sure that many of you participated by attending the hearings and providing testimony at the hearings that were held beginning January 9th and continuing on the 16th, the 20th, and finally on the 23rd. Where our hearing board met, and after having heard public testimony from many of you in this room and many others as well, they had deliberation on that last date, and then finally issued an order for abatement that contains within it specific provisions that SoCalGas is required to comply with for the duration of the period that the order for abatement is in effect. On January 26th of this year, we filed a civil penalty lawsuit against SoCalGas and LA Superior Court for creating a public nuisance. So this brings us up to almost current now. I mentioned complaints. You can actually see the pattern of complaints here. This is a graph that depicts complaints from October 21st of last year, when we received our very first air quality complaint, all the way through. In this graph, it goes to the 1st of February. We'll be updating this graph as well as other information as we do periodically on our website to keep you abreast of information that's current from our agency. And so you'll be seeing that there are over 2,300 complaints that will have been reported today, and we'll update that tomorrow. So this graph will extend out a little bit farther, and you'll probably see some peaks sort of towards the end of the graph. We've received a number of additional complaints in the last couple of days. And as you know, if you need to report an air quality complaint to us, you have two vehicles to do that. One, you can contact our agency at 1-800-CUT-SMOG by phone, or you can go onto our website to report an air quality complaint in that manner. So since October 24th, we've been in the field almost daily, and we've responded to community complaints. We've conducted site inspections in the vicinity and surveillance at or in the vicinity of the Aliso Canyon facility. We've also conducted joint inspections with other agencies at that facility to get a better understanding of the situation there. And I'm now going to pass the baton to Jason Lowe, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about what it is that we've been doing from the standpoint of air sampling and provide you some of our results as well.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Chair. So just want to give an overview of our monitoring efforts as it's related to the gas well leak from SoCal Gas. The purpose of our air monitoring efforts is to conduct scientific, accurate, and appropriate measurements to produce data that is usable by the public, the community, and also stakeholders such as LA Department of County Health and other stakeholders who would want to use the data for assessments. So our strategy is to use a combination of providing data that could be used for short-term and long-term assessments. As Dr. Reagan previously mentioned, that there are different types of measurements for different types of assessments. We are implementing a monitoring program to essentially create data for those types of decisions. To do that, we have 3 fixed sites located, one right actually behind this auditorium. We have a air monitoring trailer with equipment, and also over at Castle Bay Elementary School, which is a little bit farther down Cessnon. And then there's a community, the Highlands community, there's a community center there that we also have deployed a trailer. Now, I mentioned that we're trying to provide data for both short-term and long-term assessments. For the short term, we are implementing continuous measurements, primarily of some of the constituents, methane being the primary, and then also of hydrogen sulfide. And what this does, it provides near real-time data to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so that way the public can be informed of when some of the potential emissions from the gas well leak is over the community. Previously I was asked, what kind of information would there be there to have decisions to maybe ride my bike outside, or maybe I have some concerns whenever there's some of the natural gas in the community. So this is the type of data that you would look at to see if there are enhanced methane concentrations. Again, as Dr. Reagan pointed out, that is a primary constituent of natural gas. So people can go on to our website or our sister agency, the California Air Resources Board website, to look at those real-time graphs of methane concentrations in the neighborhood. Those continuous monitors have the capability, when they observe enhanced concentrations, to collect these instantaneous samples. Again, Dr. Reagan kind of mentioned that these provide a snapshot of what's in the air. But what's different about our snapshots is that these are snapshots of when what we believe the emissions from the well may be over the community. So these are very specific to when the methane concentrations are high. So they may not be at different times during the day. They are determined when we actually are observing those enhanced concentrations. So they would have perhaps elevated other compounds that are associated with natural gas. We also have, for the long-term assessments, 24-hour integrated samples that are being collected. The reason why we choose 24-hour integrated samples, as Dr. Rankin mentioned, that gives a good measure of the exposure to the community for a long-term basis. But there are also some other air monitoring studies that deal with air toxics previously conducted by other agencies, and also we have our own multiple assessment topics emissions study, or MATES, that we recently conducted in 2012 to 2015. So we can compare some of these 24-hour averages to that air toxic study. And that way we have kind of directly apples-to-apples comparisons of the data to establish, and I'll show some graphs of that later on. So let me move over here. What you're looking at is a time series profile of methane concentrations over our monitoring sites. There are 4 sites listed there, because at the start of the year, 4 sites were established, 2 by our agency, AQMD, and 2 by the California Air Resources Board. So what you can see there is that those are the locations. The one to the far west is actually the school site. The one on the top is the site closest to the leaking well. What you notice is that the concentrations of methane are kind of in that blue kind of category, and that blue category is what we would consider typical ambient methane values. So you can see most of the time the concentrations are in the kind of blue or 0 to 3 ppm range. You can see though that there are times when the monitors are observing enhanced concentrations, and sometimes they're coordinated between the sites. You can see like right there, several sites are connected when they see enhanced concentrations of methane, but it kind of gives you a snapshot on an hourly basis of what the And then over time, as we moved into late January, 2 more air monitoring stations were deployed, one each by AQMD and ARB. And you can see the concentrations there. So when looking at the January average, so that was kind of an hour-by-hour time frame. And I should also mention that when looking at the hour-by-hour time frame, we did see more enhanced concentrations during the nighttime than we did during the daytime. So that's the one advantage also that we get from continuous data, is that we can kind of establish this higher time resolution. Again, that's good for decision-making processes of, for example, I get the questions of, is it safe to go to my house during the day? Well, this is additional information that can say, well, a lot of times during the day, you don't see as many enhanced concentrations, although as Dr. Rainey pointed out, past couple days there have been quite a few enhanced concentrations periods observed during the day. So I mean, it's just a metric. Again, it's not determining whether everything is absolutely safe or not, but at least you have an idea of what areas in your community. These are averages through the month of January for the 6 sites. You can see that for site 4, which is the green dot, which is closest to the facility, it has the highest overall average for January for methane, and the second highest average is one that's in red, which is the ARB site. And a lot of times when you look at the topography of the location of the well and relative to where our monitors are, a lot of times what we see is the enhanced concentrations follow the canyon areas. So the gas will naturally just basically fall into those areas, especially during the nighttime, what's called canyon backflows. So ARB has been conducting weekly air measurements with a plane to estimate the amount of methane emissions coming from the well. And as you can see, the estimated emissions from as calculated from these airplane measurements, peaks in late November and has been declining ever since. And we're getting to a point in the last 2 flights that they have that they're about equal to each other. A lot of that has to deal with that the pressure of the reservoir is at a very low point and it's been stabilized. So the airplane measurements that show that are also consistent with that observation. The red line is a cumulative amount of methane that has been released from the leaking well. And as you can see, as a period of time, it has increased, but the slope of the increase has kind of steadied out. Another thing that AQMD has been conducting to kind of get more spatial resolution, you saw that we had deployed 3 fixed sites, but that doesn't tell us a lot of what's being in between those sites or in communities that are farther away. So we have through the board action that was conducted by AQMD, for which Supervisor Antonovich was part of, we unanimously voted AQMD to be able to appropriate funds to secure some equipment. Part of this equipment was to acquire the mobile methane analyzer that you can see that you placed on top of a SUV electric. And we were able to basically go around the neighborhoods morning, daytime, and evening to be able to survey multiple areas. Initially, we started off in the Porter Ranch communities because that's where we're seeing the high concentrations. We used that to basically confirm the sites of our fixed locations. But then we also started extending the range out into neighboring communities, including Granada Hills, Reseda, Chatsworth. So that way, because there were concerns about the methane concentrations or effects of the natural gas leak extending out to other communities. So these are still routinely going on. In fact, recently we've been targeting a lot of the sensitive receptors for the schools. So we've been, the last few weeks, surveying different schools and the areas in between. And this slide shows that. So this is a recent survey that was conducted 2 weeks ago, and we're continuing that effort now. As we notice, most of the enhanced concentrations, as you would expect, we would see in the most adjacent communities. As we go farther away, we see less occurrences of enhanced concentrations in that. As Dr. Rankin talked about, one of the primary air toxins of concern, and known air toxins of concern, is benzene. He had mentioned that they compared some of their values to what baseline values would be. Just to kind of present some of the data from our toxins assessment that we did a couple of years ago. To the left is a graph showing the left 3 bars indicate the overall basin average for that time period of our benzene measurements that were conducted. And then the 2 adjacent bars, let me just go ahead and put them out. These for our nearest close by stations, we had one at Burbank and also one at central Los Angeles. Those are the benzene concentration averages for the year and also the minimum and maximum values that were observed for that study. So to the right, where you see the measurements here, the averages, this represents the 2 of our sites where we've been conducting the 24-hour measurements over in this area, both at the school site and also at the 2 school sites, one in Castle Bay Elementary and the Prnc Community School. The one over right here is the ones that are the averages for the 12-hour integrated samples that Dr. Rankin talked about previously. To your right is the averages of the 10 different stations that were studied as part of that one-year study that was conducted 2 years ago. You can see that the average concentrations are within that range of 0.3 to 0.5 that Dr. Rankin talked about, and the concentrations that you see to your far right are again those averages that we've observed at our sites, depicted in blue, and then yellow is the averages from the 12-hour integrated samples that were conducted by SoCalGas. So again, as Dr. Rankin mentioned, our conclusions are similar in terms of, at least for benzene, the concentrations are consistent with what we consider typical at this point for long-term averaging. And then at that point, we can take any questions. So questions are targeted for any of our agencies. The one thing I did want to mention to answer her question, your question was that you may have seen some samples of really high benzene, perhaps on our website. Our website has some samples that were taken about 10 feet from the well. So because it's what's considered a source level sample, the concentrations were expected to be very high. So when you're comparing that high of a level, like the type of sample, just to kind of give you context. I mean, that's one of the important things when looking through all this data. It's very hard to distinguish, okay, we've got graph samples, we've got 24-hour integrated samples, we've got continuous measurements. It's one thing when looking through all the data. I mean, we do this for a living to look at this data. It's very confusing. I mean, it's a lot to look at. So when you look at a value, please try to make sure that you have the correct context for it, because you may see a super high sample, but it may have been either taken directly near the well, and we'll be collecting samples at the well site itself for assessing the results. So again, that should be compared to maybe a community sample, but it shouldn't be, the value shouldn't be associated with what is being observed in the community.